Welcome to the Tea Grannies. I'm Elise.
And I'm Mariah. Today we're here to talk about setting, so pour yourself a cup of tea and let's get started.
One, Violet. Into the unknown. This date was doomed. The man across the table, Anthony, stared off into space. It was her fault. Violet hadn't stopped talking about the Final Fantasy VII remake since they sat down to dinner at the cozy Italian place she'd picked. She could smell the breadsticks in the air. Servers bustled around them, each dressed in black pants and white button-up shirts. Violet had put on pants for this date too, rather than leggings, which she wished she could live in at all times. She always wore them while at home, and that thought made her want to teleport there. Back to her small apartment and couch with a her-shaped dent on the left side. The warm light from the candle in the center of the table cast a glow on her date's wonderful cheekbones. It was a shame this wasn't going to work out. He was so very pretty. She knew she was to blame. She always was. She couldn't stop talking. It was part of having obsessive-compulsive disorder. She had to fill silences, even those only nanoseconds long. Silences between sentences felt like physical spaces, spaces where she could be criticized, told she was annoying, or just hear the echo of words she'd just spoken. She couldn't leave those gaps. It was part of what her brain did to her. Wash your hands right now or your parents will die. Don't stop talking or your date will show you how little interest he has in you. Her best friend once read a book about eating disorders called My Life Without ED. It talked about giving your eating disorder a name to help separate it from yourself.
I loved this first page. We got quite a few things. We have a awkwardly tense but relatable situation. We got some mental illness rep and discussion and a lot of very well introduced information on our main character, which is Violet. The one thing I did want more of, very fitting for this episode, is I wanted more setting. I think it's important to know what to add and what to leave out when it comes to setting in general, but especially on the first page. If you have too much setting, you're going to lose your reader, and not enough setting, they can't place the scene in their mind. So the main places I'd like to see more setting is right in the first paragraph, when she says they're at a cozy Italian place. I think most of us have a vision of what that entails, but it's one of those places where I'd like to read the description and let my brain make the connection of, oh, it's a cozy Italian place, instead of reading those exact words. So are they inside? Do they have one of those amazing brick ovens for making pizza? Is it warm in there because of that? Is it a super small place? And then another spot I would have liked to have a little bit of setting is when she's thinking about her apartment. It's super small, but you could really do a lot with it. You know, what color is the couch? What type of the couch? What type of couch is it, rather? It's a small thing. It can only be one word, but it gives the reader enough information for them to start building the setting in their head a little bit more.
Yeah. I think that fits into what the notes that I had about setting as well, in just making the mundane feel more interesting. It's amazing when a writer can do that well. So I have a few notes about that. But just to go more chronologically here, like the opening line for this chapter is killer.
So good.
So good. It makes me so happy. Anything that starts off with doom, it seems like it's going to be a fun time for me, not for the character, obviously, but that's what matters. And I especially love how this page starts off humorous and then takes a turn for the serious. Like, we get to know about Violet and her anxieties. And it's this perfect blend of self-deprecating turning into like self-shaming, basically, which it's such a fine line to walk. And the way it's written just feels so incredibly realistic that it's just like, yeah, this could be any of us.
Yeah, this could be me. This is me.
And so not only am I like laughing at the start, but then I'm also feeling incredible empathy for Violet by the end of this page. So like that ticks all my boxes for getting invested into a POV. And yeah, I'm really happy with how that turned out. But I'm with you on the setting notes for sure. Like, not that a first page needs to have a lot of it, and you touched on that too. It's a balancing act. You don't want to info dump or go on too long, because then you'll lose people without having that emotional connection to the character. I don't want to downplay that or bump that into another page. Like that should stay as early on as we have it already. But adding small visual details that bring out the vibe of things, like you were saying, if there's more details about the type of restaurant that it is before it's even said that it's Italian, like if that even needs to be said, if you describe it in such a way that that's obvious, that can do a lot to bring it out. Like I think that there's a line in there about the servers and what they're wearing black pants and white shirts or something like that. I thought that worked really well. Like that was just very distinct and very easy to visualize and very natural. So adding some details about the physical setting itself around the same time as you add those things about the servers would also it would make this really pop. I think it would add just that whatever's missing. And I think we talked about this in the last episode when we were doing feedback, because we had a first page that took place in a school, which is a pretty generic setting. You know, there's nothing fantasy world buildy about that. You don't have to go into a whole lot of detail to get people to understand where you are. It's pretty straightforward. And I see this as similar. Like it could be any restaurant. It could be Mexican. It could be it could be a diner. It doesn't really matter. But if you're going to make that a facet of the scene, make that facet interesting however you can. So I find that the more tactile and specific you can make small beats of description, the more the scene will stand out. Not because the location is unique, like it's not, we know that, but because it's so vivid that it's just so easy to lose yourself in. You feel like you're there. You can taste it. You can smell it. Like we've got details about the breadsticks. You can already smell it.
I was just going to say, I love that detail about the breadsticks.
So much.
That's just making me like, oh man, I haven't been to Olive Garden in a really long time.
I was thinking that too. But yeah,
it's like knockoff Italian food, but like the breadsticks
are legendary. But yeah, adding even more sensory details. It doesn't always have to be visual, but if you add one visual, then add another sensory. So what does it smell like? Describe the spices. Like I think the classic Italian ones would be, I don't know, basil, rosemary, thyme, whatever. But adding that into the air, or like you can smell pizza sauce or something that screams Italian, and then add some of those small, like, and they can be 1 word, 2 word visual descriptors just to make like a color pop here or a detail pop there. It's just about like the really small things that will bring that setting to, so that you feel like you're there, and that's all. That's all you're looking for. How can you make it feel like you're there without going overboard? And that's what setting is all about, probably.
And that's literally all this first page needs to be perfect in my eyes.
Yeah, not to underemphasize. This is a great first page.
Yeah,
really enjoyed it. The details are all awesome. Welcome here. Thanks everyone for listening in out there in the internet. We're so thrilled to be able to chat with our guests today. I've been very excited for this episode since we started talking about planning it.
Me too.
Because I knew Eileen would say yes, but having Crystal here is fabulous because I don't think we've actually ever met in person or otherwise. So Crystal, it's lovely to meet you. Eileen, it's lovely to have you back. We've had Eileen on the show once before for a chat about villains, which is always delightful. And Murray and I, for a little bit of backstory, we met Eileen through Simon Fraser University's program, The Writers Studio, and have been her loyal servants ever since. And we heard about Crystal through Eileen and have seen her work on the Creative Academy. She's always up there doing workshops and videos, and I have personally learned a lot from her, even though we've never actually talked. So thank you, Crystal. We'll talk more about the Creative Academy later in a little bit, but it's nice to meet you. It's nice to have you. And I'm going to introduce both of you in a little bit more detail for our listeners. So you can pat yourselves on the back, sit back, relax, and have some tea, or pretend not to listen to me if that makes you feel more comfortable. So Eileen Cook is a multi-published, award-winning author with her novels appearing in 9 languages for you multilinguists. Her books have been optioned for film and TV, and she spent most of her teen years wishing she were someone else or somewhere else, which is great training for a writer. I can attest to that. She's an instructor and mentor with the Creative Academy and Simon Fraser University's Writers Studio program, where she loves helping other writers find their unique story to tell. and we both benefited from her expertise. So we can say she does good work. Crystal Hunt is a writer, creative mastermind, health psychologist, productivity geek, and strategic authorpreneur, as well as co-founder of the Creative Academy for Writers, where she shares what she has learned on her way to 1 million published words. That's a massive goal. That's a very good goal. Her superpowers are curation, clarity, and connection of people, resources, ideas, and information. She writes nonfiction as Crystal Hunt and contemporary romance as C.J. Hunt, and she has also written children's books under a variety of pen names, but mostly as Crystal Stranahan. Did I get that right?
Close.
Oh.
Stranahan. It's
Stranahan.
the old Irish silent G for the win.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the correction. I should have practiced that beforehand. We will link all of these lovely websites and things in the episode description so people can check what you're all about and find their way to the Creative Academy if they haven't found their way there already.
If you're not on the Creative Academy, you should be. So check that out when you finish listening to our episode. So welcome to Eileen and Crystal. We're so excited to have you here and pick your brains with our many questions. So Eileen and Crystal co-authored the book Build Better Settings, and we have lots of questions for you. So before we dive in, we have a little blurb for our listeners. Our mission with this book is to accomplish just one thing: to change the way you view and use setting as a tool in your storytelling. Many authors create flat, one-dimensional settings that fail to engage readers, or else they bury the reader under details that don't add depth and meaning to the story they're trying to tell. Some create worlds that are beautifully fleshed out but aren't anchored to the characters or aren't an integral part of the plot. You're not going to be one of those authors after reading this book. Thank goodness. So now we're going to dive into our questions. And our first one is going to be for you to tell us about this book and where did the idea for this book come from?
Well, I'll start us off on that one. I think it was interesting because at the Creative Academy, we've done a number of guides. So we have several books on writing on different topics. And so we've talked about characters and we've talked about setting and various things. So setting was the next natural thing for us to want to discuss and look at. And so we sort of got started, we outlined, we were feverishly writing away at the words, and we suddenly had this moment where we were like, are we actually adding anything to this discussion, or are we just having the same discussion that's already written about really well?
Oh dear.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than being halfway through a book and realizing, like, I am not saying anything that hasn't been said before.
That is my nightmare. Oh my God.
Yeah. So we had this moment where it's like, well, maybe we don't need to at all. And this is where I think I have to give my co-author Crystal full credit. Is we had this moment where she's like, what do we bring that is maybe a little bit different? And we had the realization we both come from a psychology background. And so we started thinking about setting in terms of when you're working with real people, not just our imaginary friends. But we do a lot of talking. If you're any type of therapist or counselor, you start looking at people's settings, or as we like to call it, the environment in the real world. We don't always call it setting when it's in the real world. And, what you can learn about someone's setting as sort of a reflection of who they are, and sort of what they are. So we decided we wanted to do a deep dive on sort of that psychology and the relationship between people and the setting.
Wow. My little nerd brain is like, this is amazing. This is exciting. I took psychology in college for a couple of years. I was like, I cry too much to be a counselor, but I still find it cool. So I really want to read this now.
Well, I think one of the fun evolutions as well was we wrote this book maybe like 6 times over the course of a period of 2 years. And we had these really interesting concepts that we were trying to get across. And so we'd write it and then we'd bounce it to some beta readers who'd give us feedback and be like, okay, what does that look like though? And so we had all these examples we pulled from all these different genres and books and movies, and people would be like, yeah, but I don't know that one though. And so then the examples weren't like, if not everybody has the same collective pop culture knowledge or has experienced the same stories. And so we actually ended up kind of writing a book inside of the setting book, like a fiction one, to show you what was happening as these characters were developing and their settings were changing, which was a fun kind of book within a book experiment. And interestingly, that's one of the things people have said they love the most about the book, is those illustrative examples and feeling like they got to know those characters and they could see the changes happening in their environment, and they could really see the concepts being illustrated in a different way. And of course, Eileen and I are not awesome at formal when we are communicating, which I think is one of our superpowers. A lot of people say it's like being in a conversation with us to read our nonfiction books. And so that's really what we leaned into, was making sure that it feels like some writers sitting around having some tea and having a chat about craft. And that was really fun for us as well on the making the book side, as well as I think for readers on the reading the book side.
I love that, because it makes it so much more accessible. I think a lot of writers feel intimidated by craft books, especially because they're like, well, what if I don't fit into this little box that they're going to suggest? But to make it more conversational is such a huge plus.
Yeah, I feel like I would actually get through this book. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, so
yeah, neither do I. It has to be very, very interesting, or something more like a certain memoirs and that kind of thing. But yeah, nonfiction can be a tough one to get into.
Yeah, I think that having the narrative alongside of the actual craft conversation is going to be a really, really big highlight for that. What do you think writers struggle with the most when it comes to setting?
So I'll start us off here. I think that a lot of people think of setting as a backdrop to the story. We think of it as a place and not necessarily an essential and critical part of the actual story that you're telling or the characters that you've put on the page. And so that's one of the things that I think it's worth highlighting, is just if you're too specific in your definition of what counts as setting, or if you are too focused on the physical world or even the details of the setting, you can kind of lose the power of it. And I know one of Eileen's things she doesn't love is getting lost in the details, which I think she can talk about for us a little bit more.
I think too often, I think there's this thing where people are like, well, someone told me I should include setting. So I'm going to tell you that there's a blue sofa and that the walls are white. And then I'm going to tell you that there's a rug on the wall. And I don't care. I don't care about any of those details. And I just want to get back to the story. Tell me the story. And I think this is worst. And I'm looking at you, fantasy writers. Fantasy writers.
Oh no!
I'm looking at you. Where they go down this rabbit hole of they have spent all this time creating this world. So they're like, I'm going to share each one of these details from my 12 binder set, going through the politics and the world building and how everybody looks and how they dress and all of these details. And they forget that it's all supposed to support the story. So that is where it's the intersection of character and story, the intersection of space and story that is interesting. So that's what we want to get people to look at. In the book, we sort of help people break it down by giving them 4 different levels. So we talk about there's the world that we inhabit. So for you fantasy writers, this is your chance to say this is Middle Earth, right? Then there's the community that we inhabit. So those are the spaces that we're out and about with. So our workplaces or your local pub or those kinds of areas. Then there's your personal spaces. So your home, your desk cubicle at work, where you get to decorate on your beige carpeted walls what you're going to make things look like. And then we actually went with the 4th level, which is inside your very self. Because we think that there is a setting in terms of how you see the world and how you decorate the world by your thought process. And so we even get into things like clothing, because we think clothing is a part of setting. In terms of it's a way that you're sort of establishing things. So you can start seeing, as we start talking about those levels, that's where the interesting thing comes in. So how do you decorate your living room when you know people are going to see it versus how do you decorate, or what does your bedroom look like? The space that nobody gets to go into. Or maybe you're a serial killer, so what does your basement look like that no one else is having a chance to have a peek at? Those are the things that are interesting to us.
Okay, I love that, particularly the fourth one, the setting like for inside yourself, because I think about that. Like I don't call them formal rooms, but I have like the other rooms in my house, like a sitting room and like the reading nook, like people, when they come over, they walk through that room, but they don't go into my bedroom and see my dog pattern bedding. Like that's my thing, you know?
It's a special little detail you might not want to necessarily just open up to them.
Right? Because then people go there like, do you have dogs on your bed? And I'm like, yes, I did say I was a crazy dog lady. No one listens. So I think that that's a really good point. I think that's something that I forget to do as a writer, especially like I think at fantasy writer, I get the world and the community, and it's the latter two that I cannot seem to get done very well. Which leads me to my next question, actually. What are your first steps for creating a realistic setting?
I think there's a few different ways that you can sort of go. And one of the prompts, so one of the things in the book that I hope is useful is that you should be able to pick it up and kind of go to any different section. And we have different prompts to sort of get you going on your own story. So we call them your turns. And one of the your turns in there that I love, because I just think it's really interesting, is make me a list of places that your character is comfortable. Like, where are their happy places, right? So maybe it's their bedroom with their dog sheets and, you know, the scent of, chewed dog toys in the corner and that kind of thing. And then for somebody else, you know, it's a very different space. And also make me a list of places where someone is uncomfortable, because here's the truth. Those can be different. It's again, that intersection of character, right? So one person is totally at home at a large, boisterous party. Like they walk in the room and they feel themselves light up. And I'm going to take a little spin here that most of us little writer introverts, that gives us the idea of the plague, right? Like, oh my God, you know, it's not our comfortable and happy space. So I think one of the first very steps is thinking about, where is your character comfortable? Where are they not comfortable? And maybe why? Like, what leads that to you? So a not very personal example is I loathe the dentist. Like when I walk into the dental office, you know, that smell of burning teeth, you know, that particularly disturbing smell. I get like hivey in the dentist office, and it really comes back to, I had horrible dental experiences growing up as a kid. Like my childhood dentist went to like the Marquis de Sade School of Dentistry or whatever. Like he seemed to enjoy torturing people. I have another friend who she falls asleep at the dentist office. And she talks about, you know, she had an uncle who was a dentist, and she used to go there after school and she'd hang out, and so it's just this, it's not just the space, it's the character in the space, and it's the history that space brings up for them.
And I think that transitions nicely into talking about tension a little bit and how setting provides an opportunity for tension. The subtitle of the book, so it's Build Better Settings, but it's how to use setting to show character arc in your fiction. So it's actually a book about change, and change comes about because of conflict or tension. So where does your setting kind of line up with your character, and where does it not line up with your character? And so I actually, if we go zoom way out, when I'm creating a setting, I start with the people for sure. And like Eileen said, where are they comfortable? Where are they not comfortable? But also, how are they feeling about what's around them? Because it isn't just the details of what's there. Like, you know, are they looking around their bedroom and wishing it was different than it is? Or are they not even aware of their setting? Have they been so far down the overwork rabbit hole that they haven't even consciously clocked what their space looks like until suddenly someone shows up at the door and now they're seeing it through different eyes, right? And that awareness of what's happening around you, and the sort of, we call it the attic of your thoughts about your space. You aren't just living in your space, you're living in your thoughts about your space and how you relate to that. So it's kind of a neat thing to play with a little bit. And I like to set up some, I call them strings, where there can be two extremes. So if I'm developing a character and I'm trying to just decide about their setting, is their place super clean or a disaster? Do they have like a minimalist approach, or are they a maximalist with just like cool stuff everywhere in their space? And if you can set up those strings, and then you can attach some of the ends to different characters around them and some to themselves, or even both ends of the string to themselves, one how they actually are and one how they wish they were, then that leads to some pretty interesting opportunities to get some tension going on, and for you as a storyteller to have a little fun making your character's life difficult so that you make sure they're experiencing some change over time.
Yeah.
I think it's really yeah, you can't shut me up now. I'm like, there's like the first two questions were like, we got to ease into it, and I'm like, I have an opinion on that. This is where I want to do a call out to the classic movie trope, right? So you have the person who has been destroyed in a relationship, they've been devastated, and so you have that shot of them in their apartment, and there's holes on the wall where their partner has taken art off the wall, and there's things that are empty and boxed up, and they're surrounded by pizza boxes and empty wine bottles and crunchy Kleenex, and then you have that moment where they're like, no more, right? And then there's this montage scene where you see them suddenly cleaning up the place and repainting the walls. Like, that is exactly what we're trying to get at, where the setting is a reflection of how they feel. Their place fell apart, the pizza boxes, the wine, the crusty Kleenex, all of that is a sign of despair that you just haven't together. And then there's that moment where it's like, we're showing the change. So you're not having a thing where it's like, Eileen thought, well, that's it. It's time I finally got my act together. I'm tired of feeling sorry for myself. I need to do something different. You just actually show it by the person sweeping the pizza boxes into the trash, running the vacuum, and the reader gets that. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it works. We understand it.
I feel like I give advice to authors when I'm doing edits if they're struggling to describe things, or you don't have a clear picture of where their characters are most of the time. And I find myself, like, if I'm repeating that advice, what I'll often say is think about your character first, and how would they think about the setting that they're in? Like, how would they describe the bookshelf? Would they see specific titles? Is that important to them? Or would they just see that it's just a bunch of books? Like, that tells you something about who they are, but it also tells you what the space looks like, and that's what makes the description interesting, because it gives you more information rather than just being, there's a picture on the wall, the walls are white, the door is blue, the couch is green, it doesn't match. That's where you start, like, it doesn't match. Okay, you notice that. Why do you care? That's where it gets interesting. So yeah, I feel like this is really helpful even for beginning writers. It's not about describing everything in as much detail as possible and getting really intricate. It's about your character. So you get to stick with your character, and you get to stay there and figure out more about them and how they respond to the environment around them. And that sounds really cool. I want to go write like 5 books right now.
I know, I'm making notes for my editing session later, because I'm like, boy, do I have work to do now.
Oh, yeah. So good. I'm also feeling a little bit like I need to sink down in my chair of shame as a fantasy writer and all of the mistakes I have ever made. But coming from that background, one of our next questions is, we've kind of already gotten into this, but what makes setting so important, especially in comparing contemporary with more of like a fantasy world building setting, where like in fantasy, you kind of have to, you're building the world for the reader along the way, because they don't know anything about it. So you're having to find creative ways of explaining things to them and why things are the way they are. Whereas a contemporary setting, you could just say characters at an elementary school, and most people would have an idea of, okay, what does that look like? They'll just draw from their history and have a picture in their mind. So the approach to describing everything is so different. What makes setting so important in that contemporary setting, and how you approach it for the reader?
So this is where I'm going to say, I love fantasy writers. So after I beat up on you earlier, I love fantasy writers because for them, the creation of the world is part of the fun that they're having, right? So you're having this moment and they're thinking about all those details, and they're wanting to show, for example, that this is an oppressive world, or, you know, that this is a world very focused on environment. And I think sometimes when we're writing contemporary settings, we forget that interaction of the world. So this is really building exactly on what you were talking about, Elise, around what is it that people notice within those worlds, right? So I'm one of those people, if you told me, you know, oh, this person drove a Maserati 555, I have no idea, right? Like I'm making this up. I know Maserati is an expensive car, and then after that, I don't know. Like I know there's all different kinds of models and things like that. I have no idea what that means. I have no frame of reference for that. Now, on the other hand, I am the first person when I walk into something that's like an airport where I do notice who's reading and what are they reading. That's the one reason I don't like digital books, is because I can't see what it is that they're reading from the distance. Right? So the setting is important because we are filtering that world for the reader. And I think fantasy people are used to doing that because they create the world based in part on the character and what it is that they find so fascinating about it. And we forget about that when we are writing contemporary, that we still need to filter that world. We still need to create a space and showing how that person moves in that space, how they feel about that space, and what things they notice in that space.
And I'm going to go the opposite direction and talk about the benefit of unfiltering the world, because we are filtering it as characters, but as human beings, our world has already been filtered through our own experience, right? The things I even know to notice that then my character can choose to notice or not is a product of my own experience and my own history and my own reality.
Yeah.
Particularly with kind of a global market for our stories, you know, they're not going to just appear in a local bookstore anymore. They are worldwide on the web, as it were, in a lot of cases. And I think we make some assumptions that our experience of life is like what other people's experiences of life are. So I think it's a useful exercise as a writer to sort of take the filter off, pretend you are an alien dropped into a landscape, notice everything around you, and then decide which of those things your character might actually notice. Because I think we're all, you know, well, maybe you don't. I'm a bit of a geek. When you log into like an Excel spreadsheet, if someone before you has filtered that, you only see the data that's left after they've filtered it. So if you think of it, we need to remove the filter on our own data set before we actually dive into describing that environment. So both unfilter it first and then filter it through your character if you can. I think that just means they'll be more accessible to more people, and you may surprise yourself about which things you took for granted that actually could use a bit of a description. And reading or listening to your own work as an audiobook, whether that's like an actual audiobook in review or whether you're just using the speech or the text to speech read aloud function on your computer or having someone read it to you, you realize often where you've made assumptions or omissions because your brain was filling in the setting in the background, because it's so often visual. And so what the first couple audiobooks that I was listening to, like being professionally read for my recordings that I was, you know, getting ready to publish, I was like, and can I rewrite the book now?
There's some big gaps here.
Oh, yeah. How much is in my brain only, and it didn't make it to the page because our brains are powerful machines and they just fill in the blanks for us.
It's interesting because some of my number one advice for a lot of writers is to read their work out loud, or if they think a sentence isn't working, to read it out loud, because it's amazing what your brain skips over or adds when you're writing it. But when you speak it, like I even do it for our social media, I read the captions out loud before I hit post, because just the amount of times I've missed a word or used the wrong there, it's like, you know, you read it out loud, you find the mistake, and it's very, very helpful. But yeah, I kind of cringe at the idea of like listening to my entire book being read to me. But I think I might need to do that.
It's a fascinating exercise.
Yeah. So our next question, which is really definitely a question from me because I just wrote a little rom-com and I was not sure how I should do this. So how do you decide whether to use fictional or real towns, cities, locations when you're writing contemporary? Like I created a fake town, sort of. It draws on a lot of areas that I've been to, because I was like, oh, the idea of using a real city is daunting because like what if I get the street wrong and someone who's from there reads it and is like, this is wrong. So how do you decide to do that, and then how do you make your fictional towns feel familiar to the reader without copying somewhere that you have been?
So this is an interesting one. I tend to go back to my favorite settings over and over. I write a lot in series, and so I did actually an interesting blend with my contemporary romances in that River's End, which is one of the main little towns that is featured, and the kind of two nearest things to it, another even smaller town and a bigger, I'm going to say bigger city, but like it has stoplights. Those places are fictional, and I'm using air quotes here for folks who can't see, is that like I grew up there. If I put the real town name on there, everyone I went to high school with is going to think the book is about them, and it's really not, guys. Sorry to disappoint you. And then you also have the trouble of things changing over time, because when you're writing a whole bunch of books in a specific space, like every time I go home to visit my family, something has changed. The cafe is not on the corner anymore, or they added a stoplight. It was like shocker.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, you don't have to go to the next town over to take your driver's test. This is a big deal. So things like this happen. A new four-way stop goes in and like everyone loses their mind. So, you don't want, like you said, people who do know that real place pointing out every single thing that changed. And you need it to stay consistent, and you need it to only change in the ways that suit your storytelling purposes. If you need a business to go out of business, or you need something terrible to happen, or a fire to burn down, like you don't want anybody accusing you of witchcraft if anything ever happens in your actual town. So it's good for like just a little bit of separation in terms of that. But I did use real places in everywhere outside of those kind of three main story locations. So if you're paying attention, you can pinpoint on a map where River's End it actually is, because I talk about the ferry from, Vancouver to the island, like all of these things. And if you look, there's a town between two rivers. It's called Qualicum Beach. That's where I grew up. So River's End is where the two rivers end. So it's fake, but it's not fake.
Okay, I like that.
Hybrid as suits your purposes. I know Eileen has to make a new location with like every single one of her books pretty much, so I'm sure she has a slightly different approach to that.
Yeah, I think it's the point of there's an advantage and disadvantage, right? And you have to make a decision about which one you want to use. I love using real places at times because you get, again, as you were talking about those sort of gimmies. Like if I tell you this book takes place in London, England, even if you've never been to London, England, you're like, okay, we've got a Tower of London, we've got, the castle, we've got a palace, we've got certain things that you're sort of expecting to be there. And people enjoy that opportunity to sort of expand and travel those places and have a chance to see them. And you can go down all sorts of rabbit holes now. There's so many more resources. There's street views for so many places where it's like you can get an idea. But even within that, I often will make up my own neighborhood, or I will, sort of add something into that space. And I think your point is just, if you are going to use a real place, you need to at least be sure you have those big details right. So if I read about someone who placed a story in Vancouver and they made the downtown east side, which for us in Vancouver, we know is a very challenged, marginalized neighborhood with a lot of people who are really struggling. If they didn't know Vancouver very well and they were like, oh, that's close to downtown, I bet it's really posh. And so they were describing it in a certain way, it would completely throw me out of the story, because I would be like, you have never seen the downtown east side. Now, is there someone who's going to get upset because it's like, well, you said that was on Hastings Street and it's actually on Pender Street? Sure. But I think the amount of people who are going to get that nitpicky are smaller than if you are getting those big details wrong. I think they understand it is fictional, and you can even a lot of people put in their books, like, I have moved or rearranged places to suit the narrative. Just like you do with like historical details. If you write history, people will be like, we just moved that war starting a few months earlier because I needed to start then for the story. This is fiction.
Okay. No, I love that, especially with the note about historical fiction, because sometimes I get the urge to fact check when I'm reading historical fiction, but I don't let myself till I'm finished, because it will possibly ruin the way the story's going for me.
Yeah, and I think can you move a war up a few months because you wanted to start? Yes. But can you do something like, oh, now I've decided that people can wear zippers in the 1600s? No, you can't. Like there are limits to how far you can change a historical detail. And I think the same with the setting detail. Can you create a certain street that you want to have, or a certain business that doesn't exist there? Of course you can. But if you're going to start making huge changes to a real place, you run the risk that with every one of those things, it's just another thing that can throw someone out.
Makes sense.
That violation of reader trust is a big deal, right? So it's the same for your character. If characters do things that are completely out of character based on how you've communicated them to the reader, then it really throws you. And I think one thing we forgot to talk about was the absolute joy of making maps as part of the creative process. So for me, the lure of a fictional town was very high, because I got to like get out my graph paper and draw the pictures and make the little trees. And like, can we just talk about how important that is for a second?
That is so awesome. And I love maps and books. I'm obsessed.
So fun. And even if you're not a fantasy writer, doing that as a contemporary author, especially if you are hand up here completely directionally challenged in the real world, it means you're able to navigate around in the story appropriately, and that your characters can go to places where settings are related to each other in a proper fashion, and not everything is on the north side of town, whatever direction that might be, right or left. And so I think that is important, because it's important to have fun making your stories, or that doesn't kind of make it through. So if that is part of the creative process that brings you joy and sparks your imagination and makes all those things come alive, then it's important to give yourself the opportunity to do that as part of your process, if that's what gets you into the story.
I'm adding that to my list for this afternoon, because I'm ashamed to say I do not have a map, and that would really help me in the one that I'm writing right now, or editing right now. It would really help. So I'm just directionally challenged. I'm like, which way would that be now that she's here?
Where did I put that town? I don't remember.
Yeah. The only thing I've got straight is there's water on one side. That's the only thing I've got straight. So this is great. I'm making so many notes for me to look at later.
So good.
And floor plans, like from a
I was just gonna say that.
Floor plans are amazing. I pull floor plans for every building, every character's house, just so that I can picture where the rooms are and how big it is. And often the architects and stuff now online, they have all these furnished versions of the homes in the floor plans, and you can see it like furnished in different ways, which is really neat. So I love pulling those, and I give them to my editor so that when she's editing the book, she can also flag any inconsistencies, which is amazing.
That is amazing.
I love that.
Oh my goodness.
Very smart.
I'm just seeing so many more rabbit holes that I could like get completely lost in.
Yes.
I'm going to regret asking the next question, because I already have a long enough list as it is. But as soon as you answer this one, I'm going to go to my list and add to it. I know it's going to happen. So what authors, and I'm sorry to listeners who have a long to be read list as well, what authors do you think do a particularly good job with their setting? Which books of theirs would you recommend as examples? Now we're all going to have homework. Go.
Well, and I think I'm going to challenge you in a way that maybe you don't expect. So my first thing is I'm going to tell you to pull one of your favorite books, like the book that you already love and you just find it fascinating. And I want you to go back and actually pay attention to the setting and how much it has enhanced the book, or sort of where it sticks out for you in ways that you didn't expect. Because I think the first answer that people always sing when they think of like, well, what author does a great job? And they're like, oh, I'm going to think of the Harry Potter books because there was Diagon Alley and there was this total immersive world of Hogwarts and it was all of these things. And again, we really want to challenge people. Like, oftentimes the setting, if it's written really well, you may not necessarily be noticing it in the same way. So one of the other examples that I came up with is The Shining by Stephen King. So again, if you've seen the movie or anything, you can think of the beautiful Overlook Hotel. But what it really sort of talks about is here's this family that's desperate. And they show up at this incredibly posh hotel. And when the book opens, the hotel is still open. So it's full of guests. It's really fancy. They feel out of place because they're sort of on that poverty line. And all of a sudden they're going to have this, I mean, it is kind of ideal as a writer. You're going to have this huge space. Someone's going to pay you to stay in it and all you can do. And he's got this writing set up in that beautiful lobby surrounded by marble and all of that. And then as the book goes on and the character Jack begins to fall apart emotionally, that hotel changes, right? So it becomes increasingly creepy. You start getting these very narrow spaces. So the maze becomes this very creepy little place. You start going into these hidden rooms where there's, someone waiting in the bathtub and there's all these scary types of things. So one of the questions is, does the space change? Depends if you believe that the Overlook Hotel is truly haunted, or is it being filtered differently through Jack, who is having a mental health. That's a nice way of putting what happens next in the book. He's having some mental health challenges that sort of, go in a very different way, right? So that is one where I don't think that people necessarily think of The Shining as like, oh, that setting in that book was amazing. But look at how it plays into the story, how the isolation, how the weather outside, how the family chooses to decorate their own tiny space in the Overlook Hotel. So they're given a small number of space, how that works, how the character interacts within that space. So Jack Torrance going down to the bar and having all these conversations with the bartender who is not there. So I think that is interesting. The other book, which actually comes out in June, so this one is to be added to your to be read list. There, you weren't getting completely free. Is one called The Whispers by Ashley Audrain. I would describe it as sort of domestic thriller-ish. It takes place in a cul-de-sac. It's a group of neighbors.
Excellent.
And again, it is how you view that cul-de-sac and how that slowly changes. So you look at how that subdivision changes and that shifts everything. Yeah. Crystal, you want to add any? Or?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a more general one. I just did this deep dive. I reread all 56 or however many J.D. Robb books there are in the Eve Dallas mysteries over the last 12 months as kind of a research. I'm digging into mysteries next. Nice. So just kind of looking at that whole thing. And so I think what really struck me, because I've never honestly managed to get past about book 6 in any given series. I usually either find something doesn't ring well or I just don't stay engaged. But the thing that really kept me there was because I was always interested to see how Eve Dallas, the main character, would see any given situation. And so every room she walks into, all of the observations and interpretations are so hilariously spot on, like from her character, that it feels like you are experiencing someone else's life in that way. Yeah. So I think the alignment of that is pulled off incredibly well. And they're super accessible. Like you could pick up literally any of the books and open to pretty much any chapter and you'll get a touch of that. You don't have to read all the books in order to see that in action. But it is something that really struck me after doing like the binge read of all of it, is that is one of the kind of, I think, strongest reader engagement features, is the fact that it's consistent over time and that it's often also kind of unexpected. Like you realize she's seeing things in a way that you don't. And I think that's really interesting. If we can surprise the reader, it's, when things are familiar but different, that's what makes us really attached. And so that I think was just an interesting thing.
And that leads me to my next question. What do you suggest to help readers feel anchored in the setting? Like, what's something a writer should aim to do, I would say particularly in the first few pages, to make them really feel like they're in the setting?
I think establishing that character voice right off, like how are we experiencing the setting through them? And making sure, like Eileen said earlier, the setting details should not be gratuitous. You know, it just like the backstory information, what we choose to share about the setting and when we choose to share those details should be impactful. It should make a difference in how the reader is relating to both the character and the story itself. And it should be anchoring us in a time or place or whatever. So whatever details will get you the biggest bang for your word bucks that you're spending in those beginning sentences and chapters, even beginning words. How are we anchoring all of that together? And the senses are key to that. And I happen to know, because I have insider information, that Eileen has an excellent exercise that will help you to do that.
So I have you guys got away before. Now I'll make all of my students do what I'm calling a senses safari.
Ooh.
Okay.
And where this comes from is, as writers, I think the detail that we notice the most often is visual. Because I think for so many of us, we see our stories like movies in our head. I don't know if other people have that experience. And so as a result, we see it, right? So we're looking around the space metaphorically, and what do we see? And I think we forget the other senses. And here's where I'm going to go down my little rabbit hole of neurology, because I specialized in brain trauma when I was working. If I took Mariah and I shoved her into an MRI machine, willingly, of course, and I was doing something like feeding her fresh homemade bread,
I'd be okay with it then.
Yeah, she's all right. Suddenly she's like, I'm all right. I'm in the MRI, but
I do love bread.
Yeah, I love bread. If I shove Crystal in, it goes very different because she's gluten intolerant. But so we're gonna.
That's the problem.
And I feed you fresh baked bread. I could watch on the MRI machine. I could watch the part of your brain that deals with taste light up. Here's an interesting thing. If I had you read a passage that talked about the loaf crust crackled under my fingers, right? The smell of the same parts of your brain would light up.
Oh my God.
By reading it as much as by actually having it.
Me too.
You're welcome. This is why, being sort of open and blunt, if you've ever read like a really hot and steamy scene and suddenly you felt like, I'm having feelings. My grandma would call them pants feelings. I'm having pants feelings, despite the fact that I am just sitting here by myself, right? I'm just reading. Your brain doesn't distinguish between what's really happening and your experience of it. So if you want to anchor somebody, pull in those other senses. So that means you have to start noticing it. So this is what I talk about as, a senses safari. I want you to walk into the grocery store and I want you to stop and I want you to close your eyes and like, what do you smell? Like, is there, are you standing near the butcher counter and there's that irony, coppery smell, right? Are you in the produce section and like there's the fresh scent of raspberries? I want you to think about what are you hearing? So there's like the squeak of like the one cartwheel that doesn't work and somebody's like dragging on the floor. There's the like swooshing sound of like the produce sprinklers going off. There's the kid one aisle over having a meltdown because he's not allowed to buy some kind of cereal that he desperately wants. And actually start noticing those other sensory details. And then you can start filing them away again about what would your character notice. So if you're writing a woman who is going through infertility, she might really notice that kid crying one aisle over and have that moment of, I wouldn't be short. If I had a kid, I would buy them whatever cereal they wanted. I would just be so grateful. Now, if she's pregnant and she goes down that butcher aisle, she's probably ready to hork. Do you know what I mean? Like, because she has a very different experience. So that's my challenge to you, is to start taking a moment when you go into a space and just stop and be like, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? what's the texture that's around me,
Mhm.
making a note of it, because we often don't even notice.
I think this is leading into the whole mindfulness thing that my therapist wants me to do all the time. And yeah, we don't notice a lot of those things. Like you just go on kind of autopilot so frequently. And next thing you know, like it's like when you get in the car and you drive home and you get out, you're like, how did I get here?
This is why people often talk about travel feeling so like different, and it's because you're outside of your normal thing, right? So the food tastes different.
Yeah.
Everything, it's not the same neighborhood that you drive through every day, so you're like, look at that, oh
you
my
can't
gosh,
go on
look at that.
autopilot in that scenario.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
my
exactly.
challenge is to take yourself out of autopilot when you're in other places. And,
Mhm.
kind of even circling back to Elise, we were talking about what do people notice. So like when you walk into that coffee shop, what would my character notice in the place?
Mhm.
What would they, what things would stick out for them?
This reminds me of it's a mindfulness exercise. I think it's for like, if you have anxiety and, guilty.
Hypothetically.
Yeah. Everybody put your hand up.
Asking for a friend. No, if you have anxiety and you're like, you're feeling those feelings, you're uncomfortable in a situation. I mean, this might not work for panic attacks. I'm not sure. And I can't remember what it's called, but it's essentially you're getting into your senses. You're really getting into the present moment. Like that's the whole point. And it's something like identify or name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can taste, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can hear. I can't remember how you allocate them, but it's, the 5 senses and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then you just identify or name simply 1 thing at a time. And it's supposed to just ground you, anchor you in the moment, and calm you down. And now I just want to do that everywhere, which my therapist would say is a great idea. So thank you.
Also quite helpful at the dentist when you're nervous.
Oh, yeah.
Just feel like I should throw that out there because I do that when I'm in the chair and I'm like grabbing my other hand and I'm like, I can feel the bones in my hand. I'm not super nervous at the dentist, so sometimes you got to go there. It does work. Very helpful.
Whatever keeps you calm.
Mm-hmm.
Eileen, you mentioned traveling, so I'm just going to grab that and segue. Have you ever traveled in order to specifically research a setting? And if yes, you or Crystal, what kinds of strategies did you or do you use to absorb that setting in real life? Like, how do you get into that moment, and how do you record what you want to use for your story?
So I'm going to give 2 parts, and then I'm going to pass over because I know Crystal has a good perspective on this because we've talked about it. But first, short answer, yes. I love the opportunity to travel, and if I can travel and then create a book there, then added bonus, that becomes a tax write-off. Hallelujah. So I have definitely been a fan of traveling and setting books in places that I have traveled to. And I would say in terms of the strategies, one of them is just that very moment of grounding myself in that. Like, what are the things? What do I notice in this space? What do I smell? Does it feel any different? How do those things stick out in my head? What are all of those little details? But I think there's a part of that that's almost as important. So I'm going to pass to Crystal because I think she put it much better than I did.
So a combination of things. And yes, sometimes we are required as artists to make great sacrifices, like going on French barge cruises or like traveling to Ireland. So we get an authentic pub culture experience, but we do what we have to do, right? We're professionals. Yeah, life is tough. So definitely when we're going to all those places, you talked about specific strategies to absorb all those things. And I think it's easy to get caught up in the documentation piece, which is taking a million photos and a lot of videos. And the last research trip I went on, that actually became a problem, and that I felt I was very distanced from the actual experience. And so it actually required readjusting the priorities in my brain, that it was an experience first and an experience as research second. Because if you're too distanced, then you're always behind the camera lens and you're not actually experiencing the in-depth details that the mindful attention to the little things that are going on is important. So one of the things I did was I started hyper focusing. If I was going to take a photo, it wasn't of all of the Black Fort on Inishmore, it was like I have this photo of like 12 blades of grass and a giant beetle, right? And so if you can actually zoom in on the details and really take a picture of the trim around a window, not the entire cathedral, because when it's time to go back and process those details, those are the kinds of things that make it come alive. It doesn't have to be everything. It can just be representative touches, right? And so, especially like Eileen said, you need to think of what your character would notice in those spaces, not just you. Now, sometimes it's challenging. You might be doing a research trip and the characters aren't fully formed. You don't actually 100% know who that's going to be. So if that's the case, you know, just making some notes, doing some audio, and try to do it in different formats. If you just take photo or just take video or just write journal notes or just like read audio notes into your app on your phone, the mode of communication or recording of those things changes the experience of recording those things. And having a multimodal pathway back into those different experiences when it comes time to review all your notes will also activate different pieces of your brain. There's a technical psychological rabbit hole we go way down, and we're not gonna.
The other thing I do when I travel, first of all, I feel like I get an A+ because I take a lot of weird, what might be considered weird photos on trips, but I love to go back to them later because they have a lot of detail. But the other thing that I always do is I keep a travel journal, and every night of the trip I sit down and I write everything about our day, or like the stuff that I particularly noticed when I was, you know, not just taking pictures. And even now when I go back and read those journals, like some of them are old. Like I went on my first backpacking trip in like 2010. And so when I look at that journaling, first of all, like I wrote like such an idiot, but a lot of the entries really, like I can go right back to that moment. And then if I pull up the pictures from that portion of the trip, I can like really immerse myself back in it. And it really helps if I want to pull ideas for like world building or whatever for the places that I've been. It's been helpful, but the journal has been helpful, like not just notes about things that I would use in writing, but just for me and the experience. And it can really take you mentally back to that place. And then it helps you with your world building or whatever you're using that for.
And I think part of that is, you know, we're having the fun of like, we're off to Ireland or Italy or those kinds of, but I'm going to encourage people again to take a research trip. If you have a character in a high school, when's the last time you walked the hallway of a high school? Like, can you know,
it's giving me hives.
Nowadays you have to get permission. They don't have to.
Yeah, you can't just walk into schools. Don't do that, people.
They have like rules now. But you can certainly, in many cases, they will, you know, if you tell them what your purpose is, someone will, you know, give you a thing and like walk through the halls and you realize there are all these details that maybe you had forgotten about, or sounds, or like, oh, I'd forgotten about the permanent fog of Axe body spray that follows, you know, preteen boys around like a cloud. You know, what is that kind of mixture of like acne cream and Axe body spray and BO? Like it's a particular funk, but you forget, right? I have a character right now, and the book opens in a subdivision outside of Chicago. And when I was recently back there, it's just I took a walk around some of those subdivisions because it's like I'd forgotten what those Midwest subdivisions felt like. And there were just little details that I ended up pulling.
What has been one of your favorite settings to write in your own career as an author?
I'm going to go with it's a cheesy answer, but it's true. For me, it's always whatever I'm working on at that moment because I'm in the middle of it. So every time I've been in a book, I love that setting the most of all of every one of my books. So right now I'm writing a book that takes place in France, both in Champagne, France in the 1800s and modern day Paris. And so I am all about croissants and wine by the river and the sound of champagne corks and the smell of caves underneath Reims, France, and all of the details is where I am. So right now that's my favorite.
and I'm very biased because I often am writing a series in the same place. So, two favorite settings. One is the River's End area, which is like the surrounding town bits that I talked about earlier. Partially because it allows me to be super nostalgic about where I came from without the reality of life, which is great. The other setting that I have always just been super attached to is from a children's book series that I wrote called The 13th Floor. And it's about this little girl who gets in an elevator in her apartment building, pushes all the buttons, and winds up on this 13th floor, which of course was not one of the buttons that you can push.
Oh.
And every door on the 13th floor goes to an entirely other world. And so it's kind of like a multiverse idea, but before multiverses were cool, because it's like 20 years ago. And so she has all these adventures, but every time she comes back, she's a different her, and the doors that open now have different things behind them, and her opportunities are different. So it's something that's still, I've been kind of hacking away at it over the last 15 years or whatever, but it holds my imagination in a way that a lot of others haven't, and so I'm still quite fascinated with that, and eventually we'll finish all 13 books. I'm only like 3 in.
What's the first one called?
Four. The 13th Floor, Primed for Adventure is the first one.
That's going on my list.
We're making notes.
It's a picture book.
Still gonna read it.
Silence is the first chapter book, so I multi-formatted as well. It's kind of a thing, but fun.
That sounds amazing.
That sounds fun. Also, birthday list for my nephew. More books.
Okay, Maria, I want to ask you if you have an answer to that question. Favorite setting you've ever written?
Oh,
just put you in. We might cut this part, but hot seat. Can you think of one?
Probably the last manuscript I finished is set in ancient Greece, and I think that is my favorite because when we were backpacking back in the day, we spent 3 weeks in Greece, and of course we were poor backpackers, so we spent a lot of time walking everywhere, hanging out on the beach, like doing everything that was free and just really hanging out in nature. And when I wrote that, I think that came so easily to me. It was like I was there again. I really enjoyed it. And it makes me want to go back. So yeah, that one was my favorite. And now you have to answer, Elise.
I knew that was going to hit me in the face.
Yeah.
I think right now it's actually a book I haven't even started writing yet. I have this idea for a story that sets place almost entirely in a single house, but it's a magical house, so there's different rooms and things that it can essentially be whatever it wants to be. I haven't even developed it, but I have this idea of this house and these characters in my head, and it's like that's all I want to be working on, but I'm stuck in my gritty dark fantasy monster world full of giant bugs, and it's terrifying, and that's where I have to live right now. So yeah,
we've got self-imposed deadlines. We got to live in these other worlds for a bit longer until we're caught up.
I'm gonna stay in Paris, so you have fun with your giant bug multiverse.
I can't wait to read both of those.
I think
I'm gonna be all over both of those.
I scarred Eileen for life with that one.
I already had bug issues, and then she was like, here's this giant spider thing.
See, I'm the spider killer in our home, so I was like, oh, giant bugs. That doesn't sound too bad at all. I've been having a good time with it. But if there were giant snakes, then we would be having a different discussion. So
don't give her any ideas.
No.
That's a good point.
I'm playing a video game with a giant snake right now. It's pretty great. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a no from me. It's almost as bad as eyeballs. I don't do eyeballs, which we were just talking about.
Yeah, sorry.
So I had a lot of fun reading Elise's first book. I was like, thank you for the trauma.
I apologize, but not.
Yeah.
No, I don't. Why do I say that?
Yeah, she's not sorry.
Okay. Well, now that I've scarred all of you, I think this is our last question. So we'll end off on a nice note instead of all of that. This isn't, as far as I know, this isn't the first time you've co-authored a book, either of you. And you actually wrote another one with your other co-founder of the Creative Academy, Donna Barker, about co-authoring, which I find fascinating. What are some of the things that you've learned about the co-authoring process, either from that previous book or from this Build Better Settings title?
We've had a few, because we also had another book, full-time author that we wrote together, Build Better Settings, and I'm sure there's more, and I'm actually forgetting them. There's some that are in progress, and some that are already out, and some we're still thinking about. I love writing with a co-author, and Crystal and I work really well together in terms of it's almost the synergy that you guys have on this podcast, right? That when you have someone else that you're working with, you're like, well, this is what I'm doing. And then that other person is like, well, but what about this? And then you're like, well, dang, like I hadn't considered this until now. And now I have to go down that rabbit hole. So I find it just expands my writing and it opens that up in a lot of different ways that I really enjoy. And I think for me, I enjoy that process of sort of pushing and sort of shaping it in a different way. But while I can write nonfiction with someone else and I love it, I have tried to write fiction with other people and I cannot. They're my imaginary friends. I will play with them in the way that I see fit. And I don't want to in my, to me, they're very separate. And I thought, oh, I'll love writing fiction. And I have tried a couple of times and then I have discovered that is something that I don't do well. So I think if someone is thinking about writing with someone else, one of the processes to try it out on a low stakes thing to see if you like it before you've committed to something that is a much larger project. And one of the things that actually, because we started doing co-writing is why we had to write a book called Create with Co-Writers, because we started bumping into all of these different elements that we hadn't necessarily considered. And I've seen a lot of co-author teams. It starts where one person's like, oh, I had this idea. And someone's else like, well, what about this? And it's like, oh, that's great. And then they start a rabbit hole of writing a book together and they haven't really fleshed out what is that going to look like. So we decide we're all going to write a giant bug and snake fantasy story set in Paris, then we're all going to do this together. But what happens if at the end of the book, you guys want to keep writing more books in the series and I don't? Can you? Is that okay? If the series takes off, am I entitled to anything because you're using part of the world that I helped create? What is that going to look like? And one of the things that Crystal said early on, which was just so great, is let's plan for failure and for huge success, because both of those create ripples and outsources, right? So we start a project and it fails and that we all get busy. Can I pick it up later if you don't want to? Is that okay? Is it something we can no longer do? What happens if it's hugely successful and so you want to keep doing something and I don't? Or you want to take the story in a different direction, a spin-off direction? Is that okay? Is it not okay? How are we going to handle if we don't agree? So I want the story to end on this end. I want to rid the world of the giant bugs and Elise wants them to take over the world. How are we going to resolve that? Do we have a system in place for how we will work that out? So those details were important.
And I think on the process side, it's really important. I think the most important thing is that you can communicate well with whoever you're working with, and that there's also a bit of freedom to renegotiate as you learn each other. It's not that someone else can tell you what the perfect process for co-authoring a book is. We've used a different process every single project that we've worked on. And I think this next book might be the 10th one in the Academy series, at least the one we're writing right now is maybe the 10th one in the series. The releasing hasn't quite caught up with what we're working on, but every single one has been done in a slightly different fashion. And so you can, figure out your outline together and then split it up and each write different sections and then recombine it and work through it all, which we've done for some. You can also bounce it back and forth. Like you write a section and then you give it to me and I kind of look through that and then write the next one. Or you can have somebody like Eileen has this first drafting superpower, where she's so good about doing her homework like every day and is done in advance of the deadline. And I'm more like, give me everything. Let me pull it apart in pieces, rebuild it, and then fill in any gaps. Like, so we this last one, we've been bouncing back and forth like that. The current one, it's my turn to do the drafting and then Eileen's going to tear it apart. So we just, we do that. And I think the most fun is when you can get to the end of the project and you don't actually know who is really responsible for which parts. There's no I ownership left. There is, we wrote this book And both of us would be hard pressed to tell you exactly which bits either of us are responsible for, because both of us in the end worked on all of it, which is a really nice way to be. So that's really fun. And I think the evolution of each of us as authors and the product that we get at the end of that collaborative process is about 100 times stronger than it could ever be, even with just one of us and an editor involved. Because often the coolest stuff that's in like the Build Better Setting books, all the best ideas came, 20 steps down whatever rabbit hole we went down. And I don't know that either one of us would have either come up with them or been able to express them the way they ended up being expressed without having that sounding board. And to give full credit, Stephanie Candiago and Amanda Bidnell were both heavily involved in the editing and evolution of the content and the building metaphor, and like all of those things were really a team effort. So I think it's just important to give them a shout out, because it wasn't just Eileen and I collaborating, it was the team collaborating. So that's a neat kind of offshoot as well.
I love that. It kind of takes a village to get a book out. And I think that was
Really
something that I learned in the writer's studio. I always thought it was going to be a very solitary activity. And then I started getting feedback on my work, and I realized that was just absolutely not the case. Like, no book on the shelf in the bookstore came fully formed from an author's mind without many other people working on it and helping and brainstorming and editing and everything like that. So I can imagine if all that work goes into a book by a single author, how much better a book with co-authors could be. You guys working with each other. That's pretty awesome. Now I'm going to be like, Elise, would you like to co-author a book with me?
We've done everything else. This is our next project.
We are writing soulmates, so it's possible.
Or is it like a roommate situation? Don't be roommates with your friends because your relationship will go down in flames.
It's very possible. She'll be like, here's a giant snake. And I'll be like,
okay, bye.
Thanks, no, you.
The possibilities, though. I think that's a nice slight tangent to our wrap up. Just like those are all the questions that we sent out to you, and thank you so much for answering all of them. That was fantastic.
Yes,
and I probably have to I'll have to re-listen to this to edit it, so I'll get to take all my notes for my own stuff later. But I feel like I learned so much. But you were saying that like it takes a village. That saying comes in handy with our book babies. And we've mentioned the Creative Academy a few times already, but for anyone who's looking for a writing community, a community of people for feedback, for brainstorming, just for, suffering together in the same things at the same times, all of those good things, the Creative Academy has been an amazing space for that. I know Maria and I are on there all the time chatting, usually in the chat with each other, but we poke our heads into we're still there. We poke our heads around.
We're hanging out.
I've learned so much from just the few videos that I've taken in, especially from Crystal about self-publishing things. I've definitely benefited from the resources there. So just as a quick recap for the listeners, the Creative Academy for Writers was founded by Donna Barker, Eileen Cook, and Crystal Hunt. Is there anyone else in that list that I should mention?
Yeah, those are the founders. And then Stephanie Candiago, who we mentioned in the context of our setting book, is also a partner and mentor now. She takes on a lot of like tech stuff for authors, and the publishing side of things and like advertising and stuff like that are kind of her superpower areas. So we pick her brain for all of those things, and she's in there with us.
So those are the big names, and they have created this place where, if you're looking for a supportive writing community and resources, anything that you need to just thrive in the writing, editing, publishing space, it really works. The website includes a members-only community on a pay-what-you-can model, and you can find all sorts of scheduled writing sprint times and online workshops and webinars and meetings and office hours, I think, with everyone. Yeah, which is like, who else offers you that? I don't know. I've never seen that before. It's fabulous.
You can hardly get that when you're paying for like a university
It feels like, I'm just walking into free school.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a place to gather and learn. And there's all sorts of authors and editors and readers and experts in unique fields that they meet along the way. So yeah, it's just a great place to be and to hang out. And we will put the link in the description as always. And that's it.
Thank you so much for coming on our show. That was so much fun. And now I have both notes and homework for today.
And books to read. And...
Yes. Yeah.
And that's never a problem. Let's be honest. Everybody's like, yay. Thanks to you guys for having us. And I'm really hoping that people have a chance to sort of, I think setting is the thing that a lot of people are like, oh, like it's not fun. It's not like character and conflict. Now that's fun, you know. Setting, meh. But I think setting can be one of the most exciting things because it is character, it is conflict, it is all of those things. So I really love it.
Ditto. Thanks so much for having us. It was super fun. It was nice to meet both of you outside of the little static circle by your profile pictures.
Likewise.
And see you come to life in your settings as well. So thank you so much.
So true.
Oh, so good. And you knew that we weren't grannies before you hopped on, so that wasn't such a shock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the tea on setting. So don't forget to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts and send in your first page submissions as soon as possible. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Tea Grannies Podcast or on Twitter at the Tea Grannies. Happy writing.